my mom told me when I had my first horse riding lesson, just because you start something doesn't mean it's going to end up the way you originally hoped. When My Little Pony Dreamhouse turned into a trip to the hospital to remove a horseshoe embedded in my butt cheek, I knew what she meant. The same can be said for movies, since they set out with one sparkly idea in mind and often end up going in completely the opposite direction. Whether it's adding scenes or recreating the whole damn movie, there's got to be some serious screw-ups for production to be flipped, switched and reversed like this. I am the expert jockey, Ash from What Culture, and these are 10 movies that changed drastically midway through production. 10. Wargames. You'd think that hiring a director in Martin Brest, one so strongly associated with comedy that his second name is literally a boob, would mean that Wargames would also attempt to throw some humour in. However, the movie that a man named Brest started to make was anything but light-hearted. After roughly 2 weeks on the film, he got himself fired for his vision and replaced with John Badham. Badham has spoken about Brest's approach in the past, describing it as dark and giving us some insight into how he wanted to portray Matthew Broderick's lead character, and I quote, "He'd taken a somewhat dark approach to the story and saw Matthew's character as someone who was rebelling against his parents. It was like they were doing some Nazi undercover thing. It was my job to make it seem like they were having fun and that it was exciting, but it wasn't this dark rebellion." While the final cut of Wargames can't be described as a comedy, there is a massive difference from the colder thriller that Brest was trying to make. 9. Sleeping Beauty. Changing an animated film can be much more difficult than changing a live-action one. While a real scene can be shot in a single day, it can take several to animate and render even a few seconds of precious cartoon footage. For this reason, animated films have a full storyboard reel before any actual animation work begins. 1959's Sleeping Beauty was no exception, but after its first reel was put together, things soon shifted. Originally, the curse placed on Aurora lasted for 100 years, but the decision was made to shorten this time significantly in order to cram Philip's rescue mission into the mix. Additionally, several major sequences were flat out cut, changing a slow-build romance into instant love. Aurora and Philip were supposed to meet in the forest and dance and attend a treasure hunt together, but since it bloated the film, it was removed. I guess cut to the snogging is the mantra here. The end result is a much tighter, pacier version of the original story we were supposed to get. 8. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Rogue One is one of the most high-profile cases on this list, and by all accounts, the film was not in good shape when director Gareth Edwards handed in his initial cut. Disney executives were reportedly dissatisfied with this version of the film, and ordered extensive reshoots in order to bend it into something agreeable. During this period, a lot of scenes were removed from the film, and a lot were added in, with the ending of the movie being a particular focal point. That now iconic scene of Vader butchering a corridor of rebel soldiers, for example, that was added in the reshoots. The final Scarif battle was also different in the original cut, and the introductions of Cassian, Jyn and Bodhi were all filmed during the reshoots. Those are just some of the ones we know about as well. There's around 20 or 30 scenes that ended up being altered in some way by the final cut, meaning that an entirely different version of the film could, theoretically, be assembled just from spare footage. 7. Payback. Shortly after, director Brian Helgeland had finished the principal photography phase of his 1999 crime drama Payback, the powers that be realised that the film had a problem. The main character, Mel Gibson's Porter, was too unlikable. Gibson's own production company Icon, as well as distributor Paramount, thought that the film was too edgy overall and needed some extra work to lighten things up. Helgeland disagreed, was fired, and a production designer was drafted in as a replacement. From here, roughly a third of the film was reworked. Actor Chris Christopherson was brought in to play an entirely new villain character. Porter was softened up significantly, and a happier ending was created. The changes were so huge that Helgeland considered taking his name off the film, but in the end, he remained as the credited director. Ultimately though, Helgeland got some payback of his own when the original cut was released in 2007 and received a much more positive response. 6. Solo, A Star Wars Story. A Han Solo movie without Harrison Ford was always going to be a risky play, but things started off well when Lord and Miller were hired to direct the film. They left the project in mid-2017 though, after the dreaded creative differences ripped through the production like a blaster through Greedo. Ron Howard was brought in to steady the ship, and the amount of changes he and Lucasfilm were forced to make were huge. Reportedly, the film Lord and Miller were making leaned heavily on the comedy. However, Lucasfilm wanted things to be played more straight, and this meant that a lot of Lord and Miller's footage had to be thrown out and filmed again. Howard reportedly reshot around 70% of the film, including cutting a character played by Michael K. Williams and substantially toned down the comedy. Lord and Miller's set was more improvisational and freestyle, which would have resulted in an offbeat tone not a million miles away from their Jump Street and Lego movies. The Howard version essentially booted all of that to one side, adding a pinch of comedy rather than a bucket load, leading to a more conventional Star Wars movie. 5. I'll Do Anything. With I'll Do Anything, James L. Brooks wished to craft an old-fashioned musical, including plenty of musical numbers peppered throughout the runtime. To that end, he brought in the likes of Prince, Carole King, and Sinead O'Connor to record songs, and everything was shaping up quite nicely. That is, until a rough cut of the film was assembled and plonked in front of test audiences. The one thing they hated was the music. Naturally, Brooks was taken aback by this reaction, since he now had some major alterations to make. He had to pluck one of the core elements from his movie and fill in that hole with brand new scenes, stripping the music entirely and heading back for reshoots to film some replacement footage. The final cut was received relatively well, so this rejig wasn't a complete disaster. But going from a musical to a more straightforward comedy drama can't have been easy. 4. The Emperor's New Groove. Despite it being a breezy, light-hearted family film, the production of The Emperor's New Groove was the exact opposite. The flick was originally going to be called Kingdom of the Sun, and was headed up by two directors, Mark Dindal, who had previously worked on The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and had a vision for as entertaining a movie as possible, and Roger Allers, fresh off helming The Lion King, who wanted to make another grand, sweeping musical. Of course, Disney wanted quick and easy. Since Allers was the original director, the studio approached him with their concerns, but when the two parties couldn't reach an agreement, Allers left the project. At this stage, roughly a quarter of the film had been animated, but Dindal had to start from scratch, developing a brand new story, new storyboards, and completely reshaping several characters. The resulting Emperor's New Groove is essentially a buddy cop comedy, a million miles away from the slower, emotionally driven musical that Allers had originally envisioned. 3. New Mutants. While we don't yet know the full extent or nature of the changes that have been applied to New Mutants, pretty much everything we've heard about the film over the last 2 years has indicated that the final product will be completely different to the one that started shooting. In any case, what was supposed to be a 2018 release got delayed endlessly for reshoots. These were supposedly going to add in several new characters, alter the post-credit scene, and beef up the scares, partly as a response to the mega success of horror film It Chapter 1, as well as New Mutants' own chilling debut trailer. Really, Disney's purchase of Fox has more than likely been a big factor in the movie's delays and changes. Disney is a much more family-friendly studio, so they perhaps want to see the scares reduced rather than increased, and this could be causing friction behind the scenes. It was also recently reported that New Mutants will be woven into the MCU, with the film removing all references to the previous X-Men movies. It's going to be a whole world away from what was originally shot by now at least, so it's no wonder that it is taking so long. Whether we actually see it or not is a question best left not asked. 2. Exorcist The Beginning. Paul Schrader aimed for a more psychologically complex movie that was light on bloody violence with his take on the Exorcist prequel. Unfortunately for him though, that wasn't what producers at Morgan Creek had hoped for. They wanted something that was more conventional, more mainstream. So they took the drastic measure of firing him over releasing the completed cut that they actually had in their possession. Rennie Harlin was brought in as the new director, and he refilmed pretty much everything, removing characters, adding in new ones, and attempting to make a more straightforward, scary movie. Funnily enough, Schrader's version was eventually released under the title Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, after Harlin's version crashed and burned. So basically, this mess of a production was a giant waste of money. 1. Enemy Mine. Originally, Richard LeCrane was the man behind the camera for this oft-forgotten 80s sci-fi flick, but he failed to deliver the goods and was subsequently replaced. LeCrane's version of Enemy Mine reportedly looked very cheap, with his directorial style not selling the otherworldly nature of the environments and alien characters. The film basically looked like what it was, a bunch of adults playing dress-up in the wilderness. At this stage, the executives at Fox had a big decision to make: write off the millions of dollars they'd already spent on production and put the movie on the shelf, or start afresh with a new director at the helm. In hindsight, they made the foolish decision to soldier on, bringing in Wolfgang Peterson to try and salvage the project. As a result, Enemy Mine was mostly rebuilt from scratch, sending it wildly over budget for a box office result that was definitely not worth it. And that's our list. Which of these changes most surprised you? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. I've been Ash, and this has been What Culture. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and come back again soon for some more ridiculous film content. Thanks for watching.